Welcome to DLS's training on incorporating online resources in your classroom. Let's start by going over the session objectives. By the end of this session, you will be more aware of available online resources. You will think about how to use these resources appropriately in your class. And because we want this to be very practical, we hope that you'll be able to identify at least one resource you will incorporate in your class this week. The resources that we're going to cover come from DLI, NFLC, or the National Foreign Language Center, and then other resources that you can find online. A quick note about these resources. Because there is an unlimited number of resources available online, we decided to focus this presentation only on self-study modules and activities that would be useful for semi-autonomous time or for homework. Most of the resources that we're going to be talking about here today are free, but some of them do require paid subscriptions. If you see something that you like and you think your student would find it very helpful, you can contact your LTS, and DLS might be able to purchase a subscription for your student if you request. So we're going to start by talking about resources for beginning learners. These resources include DLI's Rapport, DLI's Head Start, Mango Languages, Memrise, DLI's Language Survival Kits, and DLI's Cultural Orientations. You can see here that the web pages are listed and they'll be listed throughout, so you can get easy access to all of the resources. First up is DLI's Rapport. Rapport is designed to practice very basic general and military language. It's available in almost 50 languages and dialects, and it does require a login, although it's free, so you can sign up for free with your email address. Rapport includes cultural orientation information that is in English. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But the language portion is basic language survival modules. You can see some of the examples of the topics here, and they're things that you would find in any basic language course. In the actual modules themselves, you can see that it has a video portion with an audio. There's an avatar speaking the phrases. You can toggle between seeing the phrases in English, seeing a transliteration, and then also seeing the target language translation of the words. There are some very basic game-like activities in Rapport, matching words to their translations, etc. And as you go through and complete the activities, you get feedback with linguistic and cultural information. Next up is DLI's Head Start. Head Start is like Rapport in that it focuses on very basic general and military language. It's also available in almost 50 languages and dialects, and it also requires a login, but again, you can sign up for free with your email. It's organized into sound and script and military modules, but sound and script is more than just letters, alphabet, and sounds. As you can see here, some of the modules in the German sound and script include describing people and climate and weather. Each module includes culture notes and grammar notes, as well as some sort of game-like activities. So you can see here that they're doing card matching and tic-tac-toe. Head Start's military modules include a lot of basic military phrases that might be useful if your student is in the military and they're interested in military-specific terminology, vocabulary that they can use on the job. So for example, this military module on weapons has things such as load your rifle, insert the magazine into your M16, things that you might not necessarily think to teach your students, but might be helpful for them. So this is one of the examples of those game type activities in Head Start. Very basic matching activity where they have to remember which card has the English translation that corresponds to the target language word. You'll notice here that the words are practiced in isolation. One thing that's nice about Head Start is that it does progress. So first the activities start focusing on the target words only in isolation, but eventually they move on to phrases and sentences and eventually conversations. So by the end of a Head Start module, the students are doing something like this activity. where they click on the video, they listen to a conversation, and then they have to answer a comprehension question based on the conversation. So they're still very focused on understanding the target words for the module, so it's still very word focused, but the words are in the context of language that sounds somewhat natural in a natural conversation. So this is one of the advantages, I think, of Head Start over Rapport, is that it does give the students an opportunity to practice vocabulary in context. So it's also a little more advanced. So if your student is very, very basic beginning, Rapport might be where you want to be, but if you want to give them a little bit more of a challenge, Head Start might be better. So how can you use Rapport or Head Start for your class? As I mentioned, a lot of the modules in both of these programs cover topics that are likely to be covered in a very basic course. So if you've taught your students something and there's a Head Start module or a Rapport module that reinforces the vocabulary in the topic, you may want to assign it so that the student has an extra opportunity to spend some time, whether in their semi-autonomous time or in their homework, learning the vocabulary, practicing it in a lot of different ways. Also, I talked a little bit about how the military modules in Head Start can introduce your student to military-specific vocabulary that might be helpful for them that you may or may not think of right away. Because these two programs are very vocabulary-based, they're really only good for vocabulary reinforcement and practice. The next resource for beginning learners is Mango Languages. Mango Languages is a subscription service. However, a lot of public libraries subscribe for their users, so you can access Mango for free if you have a library card. I know, for example, Arlington County and DC Public Libraries both have access to Mango for their library card holders. So your student might want to check and see if they have a library card, if their library offers it as well. Mango includes a ton of languages, including some sillier ones like Pirate or Soccer Celebration. They also have some interesting, very specific ones, such as Arab Etiquette or Business Chinese. Mango Languages does include grammar and culture notes throughout the module, but most of the time it's based on vocabulary learning. It's a conversation-based program, and by that I mean that it starts by giving the students input through a conversation. So, for example, you can say in this chapter they're going to be studying this particular conversation. After that, every vocabulary word, all of the phrases that they learn are related to having that conversation or a similar conversation. But really, they have the conversation at the beginning of the chapter, and from then on it's mostly practicing words and phrases in isolation. There is a big focus on translation in Mango. So for example, throughout a lot of the course, students will see English with a target language translation and words color-coded to show students what exactly corresponds to what. They do have some helpful information though, whether or not it's formal or informal, whether you're addressing a man or a woman when you're speaking, so there's some helpful information included there. The activities within Mango are very repetitive. So once you're introduced to a phrase, you'll see it 5 or 6 times. How do you say this? How do you say this? And in some ways that can be very good for students for retention. In other ways it can also be a little bit tedious. But there are some other helpful things. They kind of encourage students to problem solve sometimes. So they'll have them say the same expression, you sell maps, again and again, and then, well, how do you think they might say he sells maps? Or how do you think you might say she sells maps? And in that way, it asks the students to kind of problem solve a little bit and maybe experiment within the language, even though it is still very vocabulary and translation based. Next is Memrise. Memrise is another subscription service, but it does have a lot of courses that can be accessed for free. It also offers a ton of languages sorted by region, so you can go to their webpage and see if your language is available. Memrise is very gamified. You can see here that there are points awarded for every activity. It sets a goal of how many minutes a day you need to practice, how many words you learned, and what your streak is. So it keeps track of all these stats to try and incentivize the learner to log in and actually spend the time working on the app. Memrise is very vocabulary focused, and most of what I saw in what I looked at, which was a beginning course, was very isolated words and expressions with the meaning. Memrise has a variety of activities, such as multiple choice, like this, matching the English expression to the target language one. In addition to multiple choice, they also have some fill in the blanks or short answer questions. So for example, they have to write the Spanish word for the English word that they see. There are also some listening questions. So students will either hear a word in Spanish and have to type it in Spanish, or they'll hear it in English and have to give their Spanish translation. So there is some listening element to some of the activities, which is nice. But again, overall, most of the activities that I saw in this beginning class were focused only on individual words and not with much context. So how would you use Mango or Memrise for your class? Just like Head Start and Rapport, these programs are very focused on vocabulary learning and retention. So the best way to use them would be to probably reinforce vocabulary and topics that you've already taught. So if Mango or Memrise have a program that reinforces a topic that you've already covered, you may want to assign your students to do that particular course or module or lesson for homework or during semi-autonomous time. Another resource that might be helpful for your beginning learners are DLI's Language Survival Kits, or LSKs. LSKs are really a vocabulary learning tool. They are available, like a lot of DLI offerings, in many languages, even some less commonly taught languages. So you may find lists for your language if you can't find other resources that are available. The kits are organized according to a job function or specialty. So for example, you can see in Urdu there's an aircrew language guide, basic language guide, civil affairs, medical, Navy, and public affairs language guide. So if you have a student who has a job that is particular to one of these areas, this might be a good resource for you. Within each specialty, there are a list of topics. Within each topic, you have a list of English phrases and target language phrases that are corresponding to them. There's also, for some languages, romanization. There are audios for each item, so audios for English and audios for the target language, but this is basically the extent of LSKs. They're vocabulary lists or lists of translations with audios that correspond to them. So how would you use LSKs for your class? They are a very basic, a very limited resource, but if you have a student that has one of the specific jobs that LSKs are designed for, you may be able to direct your student to that list of phrases. So during their semi-autonomous time, they may do some self-study using those. And you could also use the LSKs to create flashcards on Quizlet. The students could do some drills and things like that if the phrases there are going to be helpful for them. So those are really just a couple ways that you could use this resource in your class. The final resource that I want to talk about for beginning learners are DLI's cultural orientations. And now these cultural orientations are in English, so you probably don't want to spend a lot of class time using them because we do want class time to be mostly in the target language. But they do provide a good introduction to a lot of basic regional information. So for example, you can see here for this Arabic Levantine focus, there are 174 slides on a lot of different things, profiling the government, the region, a lot of very basic topics. Here you can see, for example, a list of the topics that are contained within this chapter, the first profile chapter, and it talks about the country profile, the religion, traditions, urban life, rural life, family life, etc. And you notice there's also an assessment, so there's an assessment element at the end of each chapter. The cultural orientations also include some interactive elements. So for example, every once in a while there'll be a map where they have to label major cities or waterways, countries, things like that. And there are also assessments where students have to answer questions based on the information that they've read. Note though that some information may be out of date. So for example, this one on Syria, if it's talking about government or politics or even landmarks in the area, some of the things there might be out of date based on recent current events. So how can you use the cultural orientations for your class, especially because they're in English, and we do want to limit the amount of time that we have the students spending with English in class. So they're probably best as a pre-service reading. So, if the students are assigned to read them before the class even starts, that probably would be best. However, you could use them as possible homework assignments. And more importantly, I think they could be an important starting point for additional in-language work. So for example, you could have the students read the cultural orientation for homework, or during their semi-autonomous time, they take a couple minutes to read it in English. Then they do some additional research online to find some updated information. Maybe some of the data in the cultural orientation was out of date, some of the numbers, some of the facts about the government, etc. May not necessarily be current. So then the student would use that additional research and the cultural orientation to prepare a presentation in the target languages if possible. So even though the cultural orientation is in English, it is just a starting point for them to then do a bigger activity in the target language. So that's just one example of how you might want to use this resource in your class. Okay, so now we're moving on from beginning learners to intermediate and advanced learners and some of the resources that are available for them. Some of these are really a lot of fun, so I'm excited to share them with you. The resources that we're going to be focusing on for intermediate and advanced learners include DLI's GLOSS, NFLC's Learning Objects, NFLC's Assessment Objects, DLI's Legends and Folktales, YABLA, Lyrics Training, News and Slow, YouTube, and DLI language specific tools. So these are just a few, and as you can see, the URLs are provided so you can easily access the resources at these links. First up is DLI's GLOSS. I know a lot of DLS's teachers are already familiar with GLOSS, and maybe you already use it in your class. However, if you're not aware of it, it can be a really helpful resource, so I'm just going to spend a minute or two talking about its features. So GLOSS lessons are available in a lot of different languages. They're based on authentic listening and reading passages that are already leveled. So it's nice if you have a student that's aiming at a particular level, you can go to GLOSS and find something that is at their level. You can search by level, also by modality, whether it's listening or reading. You can also search by topic or competence. So the competencies are lexical, vocabulary, structural, which is grammar, discourse, which is kind of organizational things about a passage, and then also sociocultural. So there are a lot of different ways that you can search for a lesson to find something that fits not only the level but also the topic and maybe even a skill or something you're trying to focus on. Every GLOSS lesson includes scaffolded activities to draw students' attention to specific aspects of the text that they're working with. So it takes them through a series of activities, multiple choice questions, short answer questions, etc., to really help them interact more fully with the text. Every GLOSS lesson includes a downloadable copy of the source text with a translation, and even if it's a reading passage, there's also an audio file included, so students can either read or listen or both. There are also additional related resources included in the lesson that point students to web pages or other things that are related, but maybe to give them more information on the topic that they are learning about. This next resource is quite similar to GLOSS. It's NFLC's Learning Objects. You may be a little less familiar with NFLC's Learning Objects than you are with GLOSS because it does require a login to access them. However, your LTS has login information that you can use, so please just contact your LTS and they can send you the username and password to access the e-learning portal. Just like with GLOSS, NFLC has learning objects in many languages, and some of the languages on NFLC aren't available on GLOSS. So if you haven't been able to find your language on GLOSS, please check with NFLC. Just like with GLOSS, it's based on authentic listening and reading passages. And you can search via level, in this case either ILR or ACTFL. You can also search by modality, by objective, by topic, and by publication year. Publication year might be a nice feature if you're trying to find something that's really current and recent, as opposed to something that was published, say, in like 2012. You can find something within the last year or so. Just like Gloss, each lesson has a source text and a translation. It also has audio with some interesting features, so you can listen in Italian or in English, and you can also change up the speed with which you're listening. The activities are also scaffolded, so you have a variety of activities to check the comprehension of the article. And then, just like with Gloss, NFLC has additional related resources that are available. So what are some ways that you can use Gloss or NFLC's learning objects for your class? The easiest thing to do would be just to use the lessons as they are in the semi-autonomous time or for homework. You can find something that's at the right level on the right topic and just assign that lesson to the student, let them work through the activities exactly as they are. Another thing that you could do is use it as a source of authentic text to use in your class. So in this case, you would go and search for something on the right level, on the right topic, and then maybe you don't like the activities that they have there. That's okay. You can download the source, use the source, and then create your own activities or do your own activities in class with the student based on that same passage. The additional activities could be a starting point as well that then you could supplement with your own activities. Some other things that you could do, maybe you find two lessons that are on similar topics. You could have students compare and contrast the info from each. You may also want to have the students explore the resources provided. They could go and check a web page that was mentioned and prepare a presentation on what they discover. You could also find a recent article on a same or similar topic. You could have the students identify what's similar and what's different between the current news article and the one in the lesson, and then prepare a presentation on how the situation has changed. So for example, in this one Hindi Gloss lesson, they're talking about a political movement, or I think it was a bill that was going to be passed that was very controversial. You could have the students do this activity on Gloss, and then maybe they could find a similar topic. What's the big hot topic in India today? Or they could even look up this particular bill and see, was it passed into law? What has happened since then? Is it popular? Is it unpopular? Were the concerns valid or not? So there are really a lot of things that you can do. Even if you just give the student the Gloss lesson, it can be a jumping off point for a lot of other really interesting and fun activities for the student. Another resource available from NFLC are their assessment objects. These are available at the same portal as the learning objects, so it also requires the login, but as a reminder, you can get the login information from your LTS. They're also available in many languages, and they're based on authentic listening and reading passages. They're available for listening and for reading, and they're at levels 3 and 3+. Each modality, whether it's listening or reading, has 3 passages with multiple choice questions. So for example, with this listening passage, students have an opportunity to preview the questions for 30 seconds. They listen to the passage, they have an option to listen to it again, and then they have 10 minutes to answer the questions before they go on to the next passage, where they follow the same structure. With a reading, they have 45 minutes to complete the whole assessment. They have the text on one side and the questions on the other. And again, they have 3 passages that they go through with these assessment objects. So how could you use NFLC's assessment objects for your class? If you have a student that has to take the DLPT, it could be great DLPT practice. The students can read or listen to authentic passages and have an opportunity to answer some questions about them. This also could be a good opportunity for you and your student just to assess their level. If they're supposed to be level 3 and they're not sure if they're there yet, you can assign them an assessment object, have them try it out, and then you can see, was it easy for them, was it difficult, and diagnose that way. The next resource that's kind of fun are DLI's Legends and Folktales. The DLI Legends and Folktales are short videos presenting legends or folktales from around the world. You can search either via a map, like you can see here on the screen, or a list. Many of these resources are in English. However, some are both in English and in the target language. For example, this one about the naming of Mount Fuji, you can play it in English or in Japanese. The videos do have subtitles. So in this case, if you play it in English, you get Japanese subtitles. If you play it in Japanese, you'll get English subtitles. And I wasn't able to find a way to turn the subtitles off. So there are a lot of really interesting ways that you could use Legends and Folktales for your class, even if the video that you have is in English. For example, you could take a screenshot of the still images from the video. Then you could have the students put them in order or guess the content of the story before they listen or watch. You could have the students watch on mute and at certain points stop and have them predict. But for this one, you may want to hide the subtitles. For videos that are in English, you could have students watch it and then script a target language translation. For videos in the target language, you could have them watch it in the target language and prepare some comprehension activities. With this one, however, you probably would want to hide the English subtitles. You can also have students retell the story in their own words. They could create a target language narration of their own and add it to the video and play it along as you watch it again. You could have the students summarize the story. You could also have students use the folktale or legend and then do additional research online to find similar folktales in the target culture or in their own culture or different folktales. Maybe they could even compare and contrast the folktale from the video with one that they're familiar with in their own culture and talk about the similarities and the differences. You could also do something like give the students the title of the folktale and then have them generate a list of questions that they have about what the story might be about. This is actually an interesting format that is used by one of the government tests, where students are given more of an abstract topic, a title of a story, and then they have to ask questions about it. You could also find a similar video about the folktale on YouTube. So if the one on DLI's webpage is in English, you could find one in the target language on YouTube, or even if the one on DLI's webpage is in the target language, you could find another one on YouTube in the target language and have students compare and contrast. So there are a lot of really interesting things that you could do with these legends and folktales that would be kind of fun for your students. Another interesting resource to check out is Yabla. Yabla is available in fewer languages, but if you are teaching one of these 5 languages, it might be worth checking out. It does require a paid subscription, but there is some access to videos for free. It's a video-based listening resource that has transcripts in English and the target language that the students practice with as they listen. So here you can see in this Chinese video, the students are listening in Chinese. They also have a transcript underneath in Chinese characters and in Pinyin, and then they have the English transcript as well. So the students are able to listen and read along. You can hide either one of the transcripts by clicking on the button on the left side. And then there are also some speed controls, so you can slow it down. You can also pause it, back it up, skip forward, loop. There are a lot of things that you can do to manipulate the recording as you're listening. One of the features that's nice on Yabla is that you can get on-screen translations of words in the video. So if the student's listening and they don't understand one of the words, they can bring up the transcript and look for that word in the transcript and click on it. And then when they do, there is a translation that appears on the left. There are some kind of gamey activities to go along with this, so the students can listen, but then they're provided with a transcript. And so, for example, in this one, they can choose one of the words to fill in what they hear in the audio. So there's multiple choice, there's also fill in the blank, and this is a really good resource if you are trying to help students focus specifically on word recognition, particular sounds or words. So how might you want to use Yabla for your class? You may want to assign students video modules to practice listening for discrete sounds. You can just have them do it on their own time during semi-autonomous time. If you do that, you may want to consider doing an optional extension activity. You could use the Yabla video as a starting point for further research. For example, the students could do this video about the Chinese New Year, and then they prepare a 2-minute presentation on what they discovered, kind of summarizing what they learned in the video. It can also be a starting point for a discussion. So for the same video about the Chinese New Year, you could have students share their opinions about the topic. They could identify similarities or differences to their own experiences or expectations, etc. So they may share whether or not they think it sounds like fun to do a Chinese New Year celebration, to go to it. They could identify similarities or differences between the Chinese New Year and their New Year's celebration. How is it similar? How is it different? That kind of thing. So again, you may start using Yabla just for sound recognition, but it's a great jumping off point for a lot of other creative and interesting activities. Another resource that practices discrete listening is Lyrics Training. Lyrics Training is free, and it's available in 13 languages, including English. What Lyrics Training does is you watch a video, and you fill in the blanks of the lyrics as you watch. You can choose your language, and then you're able to select the song of your choice, or you can search by artist, or you can just browse within the language. Once you've picked a song, then you select a game mode. You can choose between beginner, intermediate, advanced, or expert. However, notice that what you're really choosing here isn't the difficulty of the song, but you're just choosing the number of words that will be left blank. So for example, at beginner, about 10% of the words will be left blank, and at intermediate, about 25% of the words will be left blank. So when you actually enter the song, you see the music video there in the middle. Down below, you see the transcript of the lyrics with spaces left for words that are blanked out. It puts a certain number of dots for the letters that are missing, and you can only type in letters if they're correct. You can do some audio controls, like backing up the audio to listen again or pausing. And at the top, it keeps track of the score, what you get right and what you don't. So how would you want to use Lyrics Trainer for your class? You can assign the students songs to practice for listening for discrete sounds. Maybe there's something in particular that you think would be fun for them to listen to, or that has a lot of vocabulary in common with what you're studying in class. So you can assign it that way. You can also allow students to find their own songs and practice on their own time, in their semi-autonomous time. You can also use the music video or the song as a starting point for further research on the artist, the topic that they're singing about, or some other culturally interesting information. Maybe they're showing some kind of festival in the video, and you can have the students do some research on that. Then they could prepare a 2-minute presentation on what they discovered. You could also use the music video as a starting point for a discussion that you have in class. You could have the students share their opinion about the song, whether they liked it or not. Identify similarities or differences to the music that they typically like, things like that. Maybe the lyrics in Turkish songs are a lot more sentimental than the ones that they would find in English or something like that. So they can kind of share their thoughts and their impressions, and it could be a really fun discussion. So in addition to just listening practice, again, Lyrics Training can be a good starting place to do some other fun things. The next resource that practices listening, especially for intermediate learners, is newsandslow.com. News and Slow is available in 4 languages, including 2 versions of Spanish. There is some free content, but with a paid subscription you get access to a lot more resources. Basically, it's a weekly podcast where they report on current events, but they're recorded in slow speech that's more accessible to learners. News and Slow doesn't offer authentic news reports, but rather they take the weekly news and they script it and record it in a way that is going to be more accessible for learners. So if your student is struggling to understand real news reports, but you still want to introduce them to current events, News and Slow might be a good resource for you. Basically, the main content of News and Slow is an audio file, the news report in slow Spanish in this case, as well as a transcript. So students can listen and they can also read along. You'll notice that there are some words that are highlighted. The students can hover over those and they can see an on-screen translation of that particular word or phrase. The paid subscription also has access to courses, so the students have a little bit more opportunity to practice things, maybe grammatical things or other additional things rather than just the current news and events of the day or the week. So how can you use News in Slow for your class? One thing that you could do is you could assign students articles to listen to during their semi-autonomous time or for homework. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that you might need to prepare comprehension questions or some kind of activities for them to do along with the articles, because basically all they're getting is the audio and the transcript. You may also want to assign students to specific courses that are available to the paid subscription based on their needs. So if there's some grammatical topic that they need reinforcing, there might be something in News in Slow that will reinforce that, will cover it again. So it could be a good resource that way. So one more resource that I'm sure you're aware of is YouTube. YouTube isn't a source of self-study modules like a lot of the other things that we've presented today, but it is a rich resource for listening material. As I'm sure you're well aware. There are videos in all languages with all topics, news, music, sports, ads, really you name it, and you probably can find it on YouTube. So how can you use YouTube for your class? One way is to find a video that you like and then prepare a scaffolded listening activity for them. Make sure you include a pre-listening activity. Maybe have them predict what they're going to hear or come up with the words that they think they might hear. You'll want to come up with an activity for while they listen, whether they're listening for specific vocabulary items or specific grammar structures or specific content that they're hearing. And then a post-listening activity, something that they can follow up with, whether it's discussion questions or giving opinions, something after they listen they can respond to what they heard. One thing that you might want to do is compare and contrast videos from the target region and also from the US. How are they similar and how are they different, and what does that tell you about maybe the different audiences or the topics? So for example, in the pictures below I have an Italian pasta commercial and one from the US. How is this pasta brand marketed differently in Italy versus in the US? Or maybe you might want to compare an old commercial to a current commercial and how they're similar and how they're different and maybe how that's changed over time. You also can use videos as starting points for additional research. So maybe there's a topic that's mentioned or a very brief summary of something. You may want to have students do some additional research and then prepare a presentation on what they find. One of the teachers during the live session of this training recommended looking at politicians' web pages or their YouTube pages. That in her country there were politicians who would often have people come in and they would record conversations talking about issues and discussions. There are a lot of different resources that might be available in your language. So think about the next time you watch a YouTube video. Is there a way that I could use this in my class and help my students learn language with this YouTube video? Finally, we just want to highlight a few of the language-specific tools available on DLI's webpage. The first is Advanced North Korean. This is a cultural and language resource specific for students who are focused on North Korean. There is a login required, but you can sign up for free with your email address. The next two resources, Phone Conversations and Accents Library, are only available in Spanish and Arabic. Phone conversations are exactly what they sound like. Recorded phone conversations between two people on a variety of topics. The nice thing about phone conversations is that the people aren't using formal speech. You can hear informal speech with colloquialisms, different accents, people speaking naturally and normally. So it's a good resource if you want to expose advanced students to real phone conversation, real language. The phone conversations also have sample lesson plans that you can use to adapt to any of the phone conversations. It's kind of a skeleton plan that you fill in on your own. The Accents Library on the other hand, has a series of articles that are read in a variety of accents. So for example, with the Spanish Accents Library, you have the same article read by people from Colombia, from Mexico, from Spain, from Argentina, a variety of Spanish-speaking countries. The same with Arabic. You can hear the same thing spoken in many different Arabic dialects. The Arabic Grammar Search is a specific grammar resource that points students to gloss modules focused on grammar, as well as other video tutorials. So if you do teach one of these languages, how could you use these resources for your class? You may already have some ideas. One word of caution is that you should probably only use these resources with an advanced class. Although there may be some things that would be accessible for beginner or intermediate learners, the advanced classes will probably get the most out of these resources. When you're looking at the Accents Library, one thing that you could do is have students listen to the same article with different dialects. You could have the student identify the differences and compare them. Maybe they could give a little brief report on the things that they hear that are different, whether it's just a difference in pronunciation or whether it's a difference in vocabulary or structure. One thing that you can do with the phone conversations is that you can create comprehension activities for the phone call using the skeleton lesson plans that are provided. If you're an Arabic instructor, you may decide to assign grammar videos to your student to watch for homework or before or after class in their semi-autonomous time to reinforce some of the concepts that you're teaching in class but maybe the student is struggling with. So thank you for joining us as we've shared a few of our ideas about how to use these online resources. But the question now is, what are your ideas? How have you used these or other online resources in your classroom? What's been successful? What's the best online activity that you have used? Do you have any ideas that you'd like to share with the other teachers at DLS? If so, please email your ideas to hmueller@dlsdc.com. I'll compile a list and then post them to the DLS teacher training course on the LMS so that we all can reference it. There are an infinite number of online resources available and so many ideas of what could be done with them. So please, we welcome your expertise and your creativity in sharing your experience with us. Thank you again for joining, and if you have any questions, please contact your LTS or you can contact me at hmueller@dlsdc.com. Thanks again.